Hello and welcome back to a Book a Day podcast. First of all, apologies from my side. I know it's been a while since we last published an episode, but I hope you will understand and forgive me considering I'm the only employee here, and if I'm not well or something goes wrong with me, then you're not going to get any content. So bear with me. Coming back to the books, this week I've got one of my favorite novels for you. It's called The Unbearable Lightness of Being, written by Milan Kundera. It's a beautiful novel. It's essentially, just like any other novel, a story, but along the way, in every section, the novel explores some of life's deepest questions. And that's what I'm going to do in this week's episodes. I'm going to explore these philosophical ideas one by one with the help of the book, with the help of the story, and I'll share them with you. So let's start the book. The book starts not with a dialogue, not the characters, but with philosophy itself. And Kundera talks about Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence, the thought experiment that imagines a world in which everything returns endlessly. Every gesture, every choice, every mistake, it repeats again and again and again for eternity. You live your life over and over and over again. Let me read this passage for you, which explains Kundera's view of eternal return. In fact, this is where the novel really begins. These are the first few lines of it. It goes, "The idea of eternal return is a mysterious one, and Nietzsche has often perplexed other philosophers with it. To think that everything recurs as we once experienced it, and that the recurrence itself recurs ad infinitum. What does this mad myth signify?" Then he goes on to add, putting it negatively, the myth of eternal return states that a life which disappears once and for all, which does not return, is like a shadow, without weight, dead in advance, and whether it was horrible, beautiful, or sublime, its horror, sublimity, and beauty, they mean nothing. So that's what he talks about when he talks about this Nietzschean idea of eternal recurrence. According to Nietzsche also, this recurrence is the heaviest of burdens. Just imagine this situation. You're listening to my voice right now. I am discussing in this episode this book. Imagine listening to it over and over and over again infinite times. And not just this experience. Every choice that you have ever made, it repeats endlessly. And that's the real unbearable heaviness. It's so heavy. It's full of weight. But if you think about it, it's also a source of meaning. Because what repeats, it must matter. If you're still confused about it, let me flip this argument as Kundera does, and then we can understand it through lightness. Instead of heaviness, let's focus on lightness. So what if life does not return? There's no eternal recurrence. What if every moment, everything happens only once, and then it vanishes forever? That is lightness. That is really liberating, fleeting. It's without any burden. And that's really a lot of us see the life. We look back at the moments and they never return. That's also something that many Buddhist philosophers they have proclaimed. For example, the Japanese hermit writer Kamono Chome once wrote, "You don't enter the same river twice." So something happens once, it doesn't recur. So what happens in this world where you're thinking that it's only once, you're not going to come back, nothing binds you. You're free. It's lightness. But the price of this lightness or freedom is emptiness because there's no meaning in it. If everything is happening only once, it's not coming back to us again, it's going to get over. What's the point of it all? And that's really the dilemma here. This is the philosophical dilemma. What do we do? Do we choose heaviness or lightness? Do we go with meaning but without any freedom, or with freedom but without any meaning? And to understand this puzzle, Kundera takes us through the story of Thomas. Thomas, who's a successful neurosurgeon, his life story is kind of illustrating this conundrum of lightness and heaviness. He meets this girl called Teresa, and before that, he's living a life of somebody who is not attached to any woman. He's having multiple affairs, but then he meets this girl called Teresa, he falls in love with her, and now the question is, should he choose her or be alone with his freedom? Because in his freedom, there's not a lot of meaning. But if he chooses her, Teresa, there's going to be burden of responsibilities. And for most part, as he has done in his life, he chooses lightness, that of freedom. As I said, he was having multiple affairs before he met Teresa, and he called them erotic friendships. So what he would tell his mistresses is this, that the only relationship that can make both partners happy is the one in which sentimentality has no place, and neither partner makes any claim on the life and freedom of the other. In other words, no strings attached. But it wasn't really that simple. He had to guard himself against this feeling of love. So he made this rule, rather method for himself. And he called it the rules of three. That is, either he would see a woman 3 times in quick succession and then never see her again, or he maintained relations with that woman over the years, but make sure that every meeting is at least 3 weeks apart. And that's the kind of relationship he maintained with this woman called Sabina. So there are 3 characters along which the story is being played so far. At least this idea of lightness and weight. The 3 characters are Thomas, neurosurgeon, then Teresa, the country girl he falls in love with, and Sabina, who has been his mistress for a number of years. And as I said, for the most part, at least in the phase of his life when he had not met Teresa, he chose the path of lightness. And I've made this point already that it looks like freedom, it looks like lightness. But if you observe it closely, there's also a lot of suffering in it. He has to be really careful, he has to guard himself against falling in love. Also, this affair, all these erotic friendships, they bring pleasure, but they don't bring lasting meaning. So it's like having some delicious meal, but it leaves you hungry once again. On the other hand, when he meets Teresa, she brings love and tenderness. She is almost like a baby to him. She brings meaning and depth to his life. But then there also comes weight because of that. The weight of expectations, responsibilities, explanations, and even jealousy or guilt in his case. Because as the relationship continues, he's still having those secret affairs with other women, especially Sabina, and he's living with some kind of guilt. So even though he has chosen this path of lightness, of complete freedom, where he is having a lot of affairs, there is still suffering. So if you think about it, in Thomas's life, these two women, Teresa and Sabina, they are representing the conflict, the philosophical conflict that we started with, the heaviness and lightness. Heaviness is Teresa, which brings meaning, grounds you, but at the same time, it comes with weight, burden, and of course, the heaviness, as the name suggests. The other character, Sabina, is embodiment of lightness. So she brings him freedom, sensuality, creativity, but there's no deep meaning there. So that's the story. Thomas is torn between these two women, but he's also torn inside between these two philosophical ideas, that of heaviness and lightness. And this is where most of us live. There's no clear resolution to these problems. Thomas, in this case, cannot abandon Sabina. He cannot abandon Teresa. He suffers under lightness as well as heaviness. That's really the real world. We can't really choose lightness or heaviness. We are constantly torn between the two. And that's what makes life interesting. It also makes it challenging. Coming to the story, then, what happens is Thomas and Teresa, they end up marrying each other. But even then, Thomas's affair with other women, especially Sabina, it continues, and at some point, Teresa also finds out about it. Once again, there is a lot of suffering on both parts. Thomas is suffering, Teresa is suffering. He wants to overcome his flaws, his weaknesses, but he cannot. He goes on to chase his desires outside, and at the same time, he cannot let go of Teresa either. Let me read a short passage from the book which kind of describes his challenges. Was he genuinely incapable of abandoning his erotic friendships? He was. It would have torn him apart. He lacked the strength to control his taste for other women. Besides, he failed to see the need. No one knew better than he how little his exploits threatened Teresa. Why then give them up? He saw no more reason for that than to deny himself soccer matches. But was it still a matter of pleasure? Even as he set out to visit another woman, he found out that the woman was distasteful, and he promised himself he would not see her again. He constantly had Teresa's image before his eyes, and the only way he could erase it was by quickly getting drunk. Ever since meeting Teresa, he had been unable to make love to other women without alcohol. But alcohol on his breath was a sure sign to Teresa of infidelity. He was caught in a trap. Even on his way to see them, he found them distasteful, but one day without them, and he was back on the phone, eager to make contact. So you can see the kind of addiction that he's suffering from, the addiction of chasing his desires. And that's really the conundrum here. We think in our lives that when we find love, it's going to be meaningful, it's going to be deep. In other words, it'll be symbolic of heaviness. But we also want freedom. We also want to feel less burdened. We want to feel free and light. In other words, lightness. So in a sense, when we lack something, we really want it. When we feel burdened in a relationship, we chase freedom. We want to breathe. But you also notice that when we feel free and there's no commitment, there's no heaviness, that we long to be weighed down by the lover. So, whatever we lack, we're looking for that, and we are constantly struggling between these two opposing forces. And that's really the setting, the philosophical setting of the opening section of the unbearable lightness of being. It's not about finding answers. We are not giving some philosophical answers here. But through these characters, through the story, we recognize the struggles of Thomas, this restless kind of oscillation between freedom and responsibility, between this unbearable lightness of being and kind of inescapable weight of our own existence. I'm sure you can relate with it too. So that's all as far as this section is concerned, but I will continue to explore more themes in this book in the coming episodes. So I'll hope you will stick with me, you will keep following, and we'll keep exploring this idea of lightness and weight. But even beyond that, what are the other philosophical questions that are tackled in this book? So stay tuned, keep following, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for your patience. I'll catch you the next time.